You're listening to a Very Spatial podcast, episode 766, August 3rd, 2025.
No one really cares what you say, as long as you mean it. What's the point in wearing a face?
Hello and welcome to a VerySpatial podcast. I'm Jesse.
I'm Sue.
And this is Frank.
So thanks for joining us, and we hope you'll come back next time. Okay, so we've been doing this for 20 years.
That's true.
We have lots of things that we've talked about.
Also true.
There's lots of things we haven't talked about.
That's also true.
No, the pause is I'm still trying to figure out which thing to talk about, whether it's one that we have talked about or not talked about in 20 years. And, it's, I don't know. Were there any, go ahead.
What have we not talked about?
They're like, we haven't
I'm not saying I'm not saying we've talked about everything. I agree with that. I'm just trying to think, well, what, and I think it's, you see from where you sit. So for me, I'm struggling to think of things we haven't talked about that we would know anything about. Like we haven't talked about Marxist geography for the most part. That's something we haven't talked about. I think we've mentioned it before.
We have, but in general, it's the various isms, right? It's, that's more of what we have not talked about are the more theoretical approaches. We tend to focus more on the day-to-day or something that someone has done or is doing more often than not is our conversation topics. And so as we look at that, and given our conversation last time with Willow and Eden about GeoZone, and if you haven't had a chance to listen to that one, please go back and take a listen to the 20th anniversary episode, aka episode 765, aka the awesome conversation that Sue missed out on.
I did.
Because work.
Stupid day job.
Yeah. But, as we look at those type of things, as we look at ways that we talk about, well, anything in general, but for us, of course, more specifically spatial perception, conception, reflexivity, whatever other term we want to use that we're trying to understand right now. There's lots of ways that we could, and I think it's getting better. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing sometimes in terms of the breadth of potential ways of discussing geography, as we'll call it.
I don't disagree that it's getting better in the, I want to use the word inclusive sense, but maybe not the way a lot of people mean inclusive. By that, I mean, for expanding and to include lots of different things that go well beyond what we think of geography, what often in the United States we think of geography, which is just, regional studies or atlas studies. So yeah, I think we are definitely being more inclusive in that sense, but I do struggle with relevance. I guess that would be the word I would gravitate towards, is that I feel like we as a discipline struggle a bit to articulate and demonstrate our relevance as that discipline. Now, there's lots of things we do that are sort of many times under the scenes or behind the scenes, or, like the geospatial technology that underpins us, the data that we have, navigation services, GPS, remote sensing, all those things. But I think that as a discipline, those isms we mentioned earlier, stuff like that, that inclusivity, I think we sometimes struggle a bit to show that this is important to the world, not necessarily to just geographers.
I think whenever we look at this, it is a question. It's not a question. I think there is a recognition that geography as a discipline and a set of thought processes around the idea of location and where in the 5 themes or whatever we want to kind of pin it to is important. But is it important to others as an independent entity, or is it just important in the way that they can utilize these spatial perceptions? But that leads us into a much broader conversation about whether or not there are such things as disciplines as well. So it's kind of a two-headed thing if we start heading down that road.
That's fair, but by the same token, as somebody who currently works on the rubber hits the road piece of that in higher education, it's very hard for us to conceptualize a non-disciplinary approach. I mean, there are people who do it, like Brown University famously does this, that you kind of fashion your own curriculum. But, we think in terms of programs and set bodies of knowledge and all that sort of stuff like that. So for good or bad, should we? We can certainly debate that, but that's how it happens. And if that's the case, then how do we demonstrate our relevance for being at that, having a seat at that table as a discipline, not as a body of information? If you understand the distinction I'm making.
I mean, it's not a new problem, right? So if we think about in the 20th century, it's always weird to me say in the 20th century, like some kind of ancient history, right? Where geography as a discipline went away in many places, at least in the United States, and had to kind of make a comeback. And in some places, as a distinct discipline, never did. And, the importance of those concepts are often, so how are they passed on, right? So as educators, all of us, right, we have to think about this is the question, how do we pass it on? How do we present it and pass it on? And the paradigm or model that we've been working under for the last, century or more, further back for some disciplines, has been this, right? That within this body of knowledge, mathematics, philosophy, history, geography, or whatever, you pass on elements of whatever it is. And more modern, we'll call it modern disciplines, anthropology, sociology, right? Social sciences, we'll call it whatever it is, right? That's the thing. What goes with it and who should have the knowledge? And we would argue, of course, everybody. And it's interesting because I just had a conversation with a potential student coming into our university who is, what we would call non-traditional, right? Has already had a career and is changing tack, wants to do something else, but has a background and became interested in some of the things that our discipline does. And our university has a program that's combined anthropology and geography. And it's combined around the theme of human landscape, right? So again, it's what are in many places are two different disciplines, but they have crossover and sharing. And the concepts that you learn in either or both can apply in lots of different areas of your life. But the traditional kind of what is it is always a struggle. And so this student, sat down and said what his past career had been and, kind of done all the things. He was born in Australia, came from there. And he talked about like things he was interested in. And I said, well, we have geography classes about that. And he's like, yeah. And anthropology classes, and he's interested in archaeology. So I think that as you guys are kind of, chatting back and forth, I was thinking back to that conversation and this very question, right, is when he brought up things he was interested in. So, yeah, we have anthropology classes that talk about those topics. We have geography classes that talk about these other topics. But even he himself, while he was beginning to realize that he was interested in things that seemed to cover this discipline, he just wasn't, really completely aware yet. So once he had those questions answered, is this the place for me? He, came out of that with, hey, I might be coming here to complete a degree. But that's it, right? The way we define that body of knowledge as geography or anthropology or whatever it is, doesn't necessarily speak to everybody to say this is what's in it. But yet, when we pointed out, right, and this has been 20 years of the podcast and all kinds of people working in this area saying, this is geography. And you should have this knowledge. And so you look for that word in your educational program, maybe to get those concepts. But it's always tough. It's always tough to figure out how, I think, to organize and transmit on these various bodies of knowledge. And as things are evolving, right? Because those traditional discipline names, I don't think are necessarily as relevant for helping the next generation figure out this is the knowledge I want to get and this is what I want to do with it.
I think that looking at the traditional disciplines, just continuing to look at our department, which just grew, but on our campus, we have geographers in anthropology and geography. We have geographers in sustainability. We have geographers in places that are crossover, like honors college and women's and gender studies. So we have geographers as people with disciplinary knowledge in lots of places that are then in other disciplines, which kind of speaks to both.
And this, maybe is a sort of a higher education organization thing, which are in departments that often have the discipline's name.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's also the fact that it's in disciplines that don't have those traditional names. Things like sustainability is, it's something that is ubiquitous now. But if you look 10 years ago, there were very few programs that were looking at sustainability. They were looking at sustainable development. They were looking at some of the things that sustainability includes now, but sustainability as it exists is, as a degree at most universities, a relatively new thing. So yeah, it kind of feeds to what you were saying.
It's kind of interesting. I was thinking about, West Virginia has the distinction of being, I think, the highest per capita number of 18-year-olds being raised by grandparents, which is not something you really want to have distinction in, but that's true. When parents and grandparents show up on our campus with their kids, they're thinking in terms of job professions because, they want to make sure the kid has a good outlook and ability to, sustain themselves and eat and all that other fun stuff like that. So they understand, oh, I have a degree in accounting, I'm going to be an accountant, despite the fact that I just recently found this out, something like 30% of people who get a degree in accounting go into accounting. So statistically speaking, no, they won't be an accountant, but it's something they understand. My, kid's going to go into nursing, so they'll be a nurse. I get that. And I was just thinking about two questions, which is, you said we have geographers in this discipline, we have geographers in that discipline, we have geographers in the other discipline, which I agree with, but it's just interesting to me to one, what is a geographer? What is the job of geographer? Which sort of relates to some of the stuff we're talking about. I call myself a geographer, but I've got absolutely no degree in it, right? So,
well,
yet
ABD counts. I mean, come on.
Yeah, but the point is that reasonably you could argue I'm a software engineer, I'm a computer scientist, I'm a political scientist, but if we look at things like disciplines and attainment and stuff like that, economist, but not yet geographer. But then I was thinking of what the hell is a job title for sustainability? What sustainability teologist? I mean, what is that? What's the word, right? And it's not, and I'm not saying that we need to have a job tied to a discipline. I don't think that's true whatsoever. And I think that the benefit of higher education is that, in fact, what you studied and what you do don't necessarily have anything to do with each other. You take what you learned and apply it to a much broader universe in some capacity. That, to me, is the real power of higher education. But getting back to what those parents and grandparents are asking is like, what is a geographer? What do they do? How could they make money? I think there is an element of, despite thinking about all the ways that we can think about spatial stuff, there needs to be an element of, at least a toe on the ground saying, well, what the heck is a geographer?
Yeah, well, I think that plays into, and again, conversations that have been going on for quite a while now, right? As we try to figure out all kinds of challenges in how we identify ourselves, right? How we present ourselves. And I'm saying ourselves as geographer, because your last question, right? What is a geographer? But how we fit into sets of knowledge. And as a geographer who is in education, right? I'm trying to pass on geographic concepts and methods so that others can apply them in theory, right? And do them myself. But I think it's interesting, right, to give the parent and grandparent example, because a couple years ago, I may have mentioned on the podcast, but I sat at a table during orientation sessions for our university. And it just so happens that through a series of coincidences, I was the only academic department that happened to be at this particular event. So all of the parents were like looking at other things that the university offered. But when they got to my table, they're like, this is like an actual department. And they began to ask all kinds of questions, just like you're talking about. They're like, well, what would you do if you took these classes? And so it's an interesting thing to tie into something like sustainability, right? Is that I think seeing students who also are saying, they have these questions from other people, like, what are you going to do with your degree when you get out? And they're saying, what do I want to do with my life, right? And a lot of them actually, I think, and it's really heartening heartening for me. There's a lot of them want to make a difference, right? They want to carve out something. And so when we look at traditional disciplines, right, they're like, okay, so if I'm that, how can I make a difference, right? But they see a word like sustainability, like they say, well, sustainable future, right? I can do that, but that's not traditional in the sense of how we think of disciplines, but it's made up of the things that you would need to know are made up of sets of knowledge that come from traditional disciplines, quite a few of them, right? And when you have those sort of newer ways of organizing a plan of attack for your education, right, a curriculum, then you're helping the student get what you think is that right body of knowledge. But you as a geographer thinks X, Y, and Z would help you understand how to get a job that relates to sustainable development or futures, right? Or working for a nonprofit and preserving green spaces, whatever that might be. You as a geographer will say, these are the pieces I think that geographic knowledge is important for. Then you might get someone else to say, yeah, but if you're working in local government to do these things, then you need to know about policies. So over here is political science going, hey, what about these things? And if you're trying to think about maybe sustainable businesses or recycling or something like that, then you're like, well, some marketing and business and some economics might help you out. And so I think one of the interesting things in defining disciplines, because we're kind of, for me, I kind of taken the conversation a little bit, but it's something that I think about, right, is as an educator, how can I help the students that come and want an education get knowledge that I think they can apply, right? And so that's one of the things, though, is the traditional disciplines are important and they're important sets of knowledge. But the student isn't yet ready to figure out which pieces of those knowledge am I going to pull on later on. So, they're just getting geography. And then later on, they'll say, well, these pieces of geography are important to me. And so I think it's a challenge, and something that I think about and struggle with is how can I maybe help and say, look, these bits of knowledge for something you want to do, which is make a difference and hopefully help the future be more sustainable, because we're using that as an example. So I might say then, you might not know it's geography, but it is because we're learning about the world. So to come full circle back in a long route to Freddie's question, what makes a geographer? To me, it's like understanding the world and how we live in it, right? So that's part of it. And that section of it is what's relevant to these other things. But I feel like I have to be the one to say, this is why this piece goes in here.
I would go back to an earlier statement that I made, that there's that other side of things of there is no discipline. We're all looking at the exact same things from slightly different perspectives. And as we get more literature, as we get more people creating new approaches and new theories and new methodologies, we're creating quote unquote new disciplines or more programs or whatever it is. But we're really all trying to largely address the same issues of keeping the planet going. And so the disciplines are good for those people who are in the positions that we're in, where we're looking at it from a PhD level or something like that. But those people who want to get a degree so they can do something, so they can make a living, so they can make a little bit of a change, make whatever it is they want to make, the disciplines are far less important to them for the most part. For instance, I'm the whatever it's called for two of our honor societies. And whenever we had our initiation this year, a lot of people were doing both the geography, Gamma Theta Epsilon, and geospatial technologies, Gamma Sigma Theta, but they were also in other honor societies for other portions of the degrees that they were working on, whether it was something like sustainability or environmental science or marine science or whatever other degree it is. So they don't necessarily feel that they have to be attached to one discipline. And I don't know. It's been too long to say whether or not I felt that I was an archaeologist or an anthropologist whenever I was graduating from undergrad. I probably did, but it was less important.
I definitely had an identity tied to my discipline. I can say that categorically.
I will say, back in the day, you often introduced yourself as an archaeologist.
Did I? Well, okay,
So,
but that
fair.
was, to be fair, that was in the Department of Geography and Geology and Geography events where I was largely tongue-in-cheek saying I am an archaeologist coming into geography. So yes.
For me, it was about this stupid. I think it's stupid. I think a lot of people think it's stupid, so I'm not unique. But we have this delineation between STEM and not STEM. That's what we
It wasn't even
articulated.
called that at that time.
I say
this is
that's what we call
it
it now.
Yeah.
But yeah, then it was, STEM. I'm a real,
Hard science versus one of those social science or humanities peoples, right?
Right. Yeah, that's just, anyway. So for me, it was a point of pride to say, I'm a social scientist, suck it. It's kind of, so it was about that in opposition to all the engineers I was hanging out with. And so I had an identity, but I wouldn't say that it was an identity necessarily embodied in the notion of a discipline. It was really about in opposition to being looked down on. So it comes from a different place and a different purpose, I think.
And then you complicate it all by saying, because some of this comes back to, right, again, as educators, we think about, how are we going to transmit knowledge on and what knowledge is it? But the stuff I keep coming back to are the humanities and literature stuff that I got as undergrad in the current research I'm doing, right? I come back to that more often than not. So if I'd never had that grounding, I would really be struggling with some of the things I'm doing. And also I think that they're valuable. So beyond saying, I'm doing my science, my geography, or whatever, there's also other knowledge sets that turns out are really important. And we try to understand that. So to Jesse's point, right, they're the disciplines, should there really be any, I guess it's order out of chaos. And we have to create containers and boundaries because it's just natural, right? But it is that struggle to try to, you only have so much time, and to try to put together some education that will be both useful, but you can see sort of how it's going to apply to you.
Yeah, but moving on beyond the classroom, right? We still perpetuate this nonsense with, having these different stovepipes of departments and disciplines and how information doesn't carry across at all. I've gotten really into the AI thing of late and a lot of context. And I'm going to be on a panel next week after next about AI in higher education here at Fairmont State. And the thing that I keep getting struck by in all the stuff I'm reading about AI right now is that, look, if you just took the GIS and society debates and put a line through GIS and put AI underneath it, it's all the same. It's pretty much exactly the same issues, context, complaints, pushbacks, arguments, the whole 9 yards that's happening. But that GIS society, if you're not in GIS, I'm not even talking about geography, because there's hundreds and not thousands of geographers that have no idea what the GIS and society debates were or what was about. If you're not in that sub-discipline of that discipline, you have no idea that this stuff has already been hashed through at some level already. But now we've just dropped AI in there to have the same arguments over and over and over again. That one I know really well, but I have to think that there's dozens of these, thousands of these, maybe even, that some disciplines are sitting around going, we've already talked about this. I don't know why you bother. I don't know why you're barking up this tree. But we don't do a good job even moving beyond the, typical college education of saying your college education is 120 credit hours ballpark of for an undergraduate degree in the United States. What, 30 or 40 is your quote unquote major, which, do the math, that means the overwhelming majority of what you're doing is not your major. It's other stuff. But we don't do other stuff after we get done. It's, as you can see, soapbox angry.
Well, but the other stuff also gives context for the general knowledge for us to be able to build into the specific knowledge. That's a whole liberal arts conversation, which probably don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
No, that's probably a bit more of a bite than we want to swallow today.
But NCGIA, GIS, that's what you want to search for on whatever your preferred search engine is. And you will find white papers, the entire conferences that were discussed.
Friday Harbor.
Yeah, in multiple places. That's one of them, but there are others as well. Yeah, so it is I don't know, maybe a conversation we should have of going through the initiatives and just kind of paralleling what was discussed. And again, it's not like GIS was the first technology to face these issues. It's just through the NCGIA funds from NSF and others that led to these conversations being hashed out. It's some of the best documented, I think, representations of what came out of that. Yes, you have journal articles or conference papers that came out of the conversations and other technologies as well, but this just gives you this very rich set of easy to point to white papers that look at, what does it mean to be society? What is it something in terms of community? What does it have to do with economic output? What does it have to do with this, that, and the other? And I don't know, our main initiative that we heard the most about was Initiative 19, which was GIS and Society, aka participatory GIS and community integrated GIS. And that's just because two of the leaders of that area were at WVU. So it was Trevor Harris, Dan Weiner, and Craig, who was not at WVU, so I can never remember his last name.
I can never remember.
Craig. Go look at the book.
I was going to say, if you look at the editors of the book, he's the third.
Yeah. Actually, he was the lead author on the book.
Yeah. He was the third of the crew, but
yeah. But since he wasn't at WVU, I just don't have his last name memorized. So yeah, I mean, that's just one, and that wasn't the last initiative by any means. So it was like 24, 25 different initiatives. And yeah, I mean, they all in many ways speak, like Frank is saying, to those conversations that are going on now in terms of AI, which is breaking down disciplinary boundaries in and of itself.
It's kind of generational, right? Because that was, 30 years ago?
Roughly, whenever it first started, yeah.
So that a lot of that was a debate of its time.
So good on you for remembering the editor's last name is actually William Craig.
Oh, that's fine. Okay, well, yeah.
I remember the name.
So
I did the index.
We got the important one.
I did the index for that book.
It's William Craig, Trevor Harris, and Daniel Weiner. So.
Yeah. And of course, lots of other people who provided chapters, if not in the book, then in many of the workshops that led up to the book.
There was a brief time when I knew it like by heart.
Yeah.
Because I was doing the index.
And it's not like we don't remember most everything that's in there, except for maybe some of the specific case studies at this point. But
well, the big themes, is that how does this technology, talking about GIS, like you said, there was lots of other things going on, but just focusing on GIS, the big themes were, what's the purpose of this technology? How does it fit within a civil society? Who should own it? Who should control it? Who gets represented? Who doesn't get represented? How do we decide those things? All those sort of big questions. Again, just scratch out GIS and put AI, and it's the exact same conversations we're having right now about AI. And like you said, this is probably, maybe one of the most famous ones I could think of that happened would be the A-bomb, right? Is after the atomic bomb was dropped in the end World War II, there was these conversations happening as well, just not nearly as well documented. And I'm sure they had this about the computer. I'm sure they had this about transistors and radio and TV and everything we can think of as big technology that's happened since 1945. So it's not anything new, but going back to our original sort of talk about geographer and the stovepiping, it's very frustrating to me that we keep having to rehab these conversations and say the same things but somehow it's all new because we didn't bother to pick up a book and look at somebody else's way of thinking about things.
Well, I
That's
think
what
to
it
be
feels
fair
like.
it's not. There's some of that, but also right. And I meant in the generational sense. We think about how we in scholarly work pass things on. Right? Is that a work that's like? Because I remember this joke like somebody posted on one of the social medias, right? That a student asked them if it was okay for them to cite literature from the 1900s. And he said, the joke was that the professor, was felt like 100 years old when he heard that. But I think one of the things, right, is why we rehash these things is also in how we pass on knowledge and reference it, right? If it doesn't get referenced in the next generation of scholarly work, a lot of that stuff fades away. We're back to the findability arguments, things that we've hashed out. But that's part of it, right? Because we can only stuff in so much knowledge at any given time, and I think that it's the choices that get made for those who continue on references and discussions of particular things, right? And if it gets passed on, so those debates, right? If you happen to, it got brought back up, the A-bomb example, right? When we saw the movie Oppenheimer, brought a lot of that stuff back up, that there'd been a lot of discussion and debate. And it's the same thing with some of these other technologies, as if you go back and say, well, just even you saying it, right? That we had this debate already, or a similar form of it when we talked about GIS, right? One example of many. And now it's being revisited in AI, but it wouldn't necessarily be that there would be a chain of people being able to go back and say, "Oh yeah," and so it's in some cases just not looking for background, but in other cases it's just the way we do things is that we want the more recent stuff. So
well, and that's somewhat a problem, right? Is whenever you do submit to a journal, you are expected to ignore everything that is more than 2 or 3 years old. I'm being hyperbolic there, but
unless it's something seminal.
Yeah.
2 or 3 years old and also not in your discipline. Unless you want to bring it in as a way to sort of like, borrowing from this discipline's methodology of doing, red triangles, we're going to do this. And you can do that. That's okay. But for the most part, you're making you could say exactly what they said just in geography and boom, that's a publication. Like, what? That's not.
And that's a whole other conversation, as they all are, of whenever we look at the things we were reading whenever we were undergrads or grad students still, they were looking at decades worth of references, not something from the last decade. So now we're just relying so much on the summarization of previous work as our references that it's just whole other things.
Yeah.
To put it in GIS terms, we're scrubbing up to fuzzier pixels and expecting to get the detail. We just are going to miss things.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of things that we have talked about, a lot of things we haven't talked about. This is something we kind of have, but kind of haven't. So I guess we straddled the line a little bit on that one. I'm kind of torn as to whether I want to start going back and finding specific content that we've talked about that just needs refreshing, or start looking for things that we just haven't. Because again, we've never taken on conversations about reflectivity or reflexivity or some of the more, feminist approaches to the way that we do things. We, I think, incorporate a lot of those ideologies in what we do, but we haven't really talked about them. It's those kind of things that we haven't touched on.
I think it'd be interesting, but the challenge, I think, is, of course, this often happens. I don't mean to call out Sue, but she rightfully sometimes says, look, I feel like I need to do some background on that, whatever topic it is, that we bring up. And I go, that's fair, because you want to make sure you understand the landscape a little better. So I think we'd have to do a little bit of that. So it'd have to be planned a bit, but I think it would be very interesting to tease at some of those things that aren't necessarily our explicit wheelhouse. But I also think it would be fun to go back and look at some of our old stuff and see what's changed.
And in the end, we won't do either of those. We'll just keep.
I don't know, or hasn't changed.
Yeah, going forward.
Yeah,
well, we haven't done things.
I mean, I think it would be fun to talk a little bit about the the isms, or to talk about some of these reflexivity and all that sort of stuff a little bit. And I think also we did a little bit of critique of geography as a discipline today, and even disciplines as disciplines today. So I think it'd be fun to talk a little bit about that. So maybe I'll push for it.
Okay. Sure. If you have any ideas of what we should be discussing,
or want to be interviewed and have a chat.
Well, okay. The people who want to be interviewed, apologies. I am terrible at replying, but maybe I will eventually reply to you. We do have an interview coming up in the near future. I don't remember if it'll be the next episode or not, but I will be talking to the folks from World Pop about their new data set that they're about to put out. That'll be the next 2 episodes.
I've got 2 on the horizon. I haven't got them scheduled because they're 2 very busy people, but that'll be fun too.
But do feel free to reach out to podcast@veryspatial.com, because I might actually be looking at email that day and it may not get buried, but I'm not going to put money on it. Maybe I should start using an AI-driven mail app.
We should have a form. We should have an online form.
Yeah, but the problem is with an online form, somebody still has to check it.
That's fair. That's fair.
And well, actually, no, it could email you, but
Yeah, but then we're back to
pretty sure that's still checking
back
it.
to the thing.
So right back where we started. So.
Yes. Another part has to happen that is human based, and that's where it all goes wrong. Yeah. Of course, if you do have an event, let us know about it, and we will hopefully share it over at podcast@veryspatial.com, as I mentioned before.
And I would like to not only, go to events in geography, obviously, and related to our disciplines, but, go to things that are tangentially related, even like sort of local politics related. Next week, I'll be at the West Virginia Municipal League, which will be a lot of fun because they're not normally thinking about either GIS or geography in West Virginia, at least. But it's going to be fun to sort of learn how they think about these concepts. So there's lots of other opportunities out there, branch out a little bit, stretch yourself.
We're going to be coming up quick on Earth Science Week in the middle of October, Geography Awareness Week,
The fall AAG regional meeting.
Yeah. The AAG in San Francisco this year. So
this coming year. Yeah.
Amusingly, both the AAG and the ASAA, which is Society for American Archaeology, are both going to be in San Francisco. They're just going to be like a month and a half apart.
Oh, so you have to stay there the whole time.
Yeah, can't
that's
do really
that's
the
2 plane
back-to-back.
tickets.
Yeah,
that's pricey.
Well, there was one year that AAG and something else were back to back, and I almost stayed for both, but didn't. I don't remember what it was anymore. That was a long time ago. Maybe that was the PCA ACA that we missed one year. But yeah, let us know if you have an event.
And of course, if you'd like to reach us individually, I can be reached at sue@veryspatial.com.
You can reach me at frank@veryspatial.com, and you can reach our missing member today, Barb, at veryspatial.com.
I'm available at jesse@veryspatial.com. And of course, you can find all of our contact information over at veryspatial.com/contacts.
As always, we're the folks from Very Spatial.
Thanks for listening.
And we'll see you in a couple weeks.
No one really cares what you say, as long as you mean it. What's the point in wearing a face if you don't believe it? 'Cause honestly, it's best to be true to who you are than trying to be a version of something that you're not. Just close your eyes and let it all just wash away, and give it time. You don't have to change a thing. Soon you'll see that perfect is imaginary. You don't have the words to carry. Hey, just be yourself. No one has it all figured out, but one day you'll see it, even when your head head's filled with doubt, your heart's underneath it. Yeah, honestly, it's best to be true to who you are. All you need is air to breathe, to give it one more shot. Yeah, just close your eyes and let it all just wash away, and give it time. You don't have to change a thing. Soon you'll see that perfect is imaginary. You don't have the world to carry. Hey, just be yourself. Wash away, give it time. You don't have to change a thing. Soon you'll see that perfect is imaginary. You don't have the world to carry. Hey, just be and close your eyes and let it all just wash away. Give it time. You don't have to change a thing. Soon you'll see that perfect is imaginary. You don't have the word to carry. Hey, just be yourself.